So I'm super excited to introduce Laura Hamill today. She's the Limeade Chief People Officer, and she was actually a part of the Limeade founding team and helped us develop our first model of well-being as well as our assessment. And she's recently returned to us full-time now as our Chief People Officer. So Laura, I'll kick it off to you.
Great. Thanks, Jory. So I'm really happy to be talking with you guys here today. A little bit more about my background that might be relevant. I am an organizational psychologist, so psychology applied to the workplace. So I've gotten to have some pretty amazing opportunities to work with organizational culture. So in addition to doing some work here now with Limeade, I've had experiences running a consulting business for about 9 years, working with all different kinds of companies on organizational culture, and also working on about 40 acquisitions related to culture as well. So, and before that, actually at Microsoft, I was in charge of a group called People Research, and part of what we did was also related to culture. So I've really had the great fortune to be able to do a lot with organizational culture. So I'm excited to be talking with you today about this. So let's talk a little bit about what we want to cover. So first of all, we just want to make sure we have a shared understanding of what is culture. How do we define culture? I think a lot of people have a feeling for what culture is, but maybe a shared definition is a really good place to start. So we're going to talk about what is culture, then why should we care? Other than it just feeling good to have a really strong, positive culture, what are some other reasons why this matters to organizations? And then the third piece is really how can we be more intentional about culture? How can we really think about architecting culture? So those are the topics that we're going to cover today. And then at the end, there'll be some time for Q&A. So as Jory said, if you want to type in questions or tweet any questions, then feel free to do that, and there'll be some time at the end to go through that. So let's jump in. So why do we care about culture? So here at Limeade, there are a couple reasons why we care about culture. The first one is we really believe that as an internal tool or lever, the way that we actually evolve our culture and architect our culture is extremely important, and it's probably a way for us to fundamentally differentiate ourselves from our competitors. So we do a lot of work internally at Limeade around our culture, and I'll talk a little bit about that towards the end. But another reason why we care about our culture is because of the work that we do with our customers. So our focus is on health, well-being, and performance, and really how much those three things are related to each other. So, for example, if we really have a customer who wants to be improving health outcomes, we're clear that you have to be focusing on well-being drivers. So what comes upstream from health, so your levels of stress or your relationships, other things that are in your life, and how those impact health. So we know these things are related to each other. Also the same for performance. If you want to really focus on performance for any one person, you have to think bigger. You have to think about health and well-being and how those come together to influence performance. So where we have is really a whole employee approach when we think about the work we do here at Limeade. So that's great. And let's say we develop a really wonderful program to influence those three things. What we know is that when the employee goes back to their desk, the culture of the organization is what's going to reinforce and drive that ongoing improvement. So the culture really has to be aligned and supportive with any work that we do in organizations related to health, well-being, and performance. So that's why we care, really, because we know it's important internally, and also because this matters to the influence and the value we can provide our customers. So let's dig in a little bit more and talk more about culture. So this slide really is the idea of helping you think about this and think about this maybe with an example. So imagine that you were in the lobby of a company like this and you were peeking over the receptionist's desk, and you might see a lot of things going on in this company. So it feels like something's happening. So feels like a little bit of an energy going on. Something is going down. And what you might be experiencing and seeing is not culture. It's actually the surface. On the surface, it's a little bit more of the climate. How does it feel here? What we are trying to get to when we think about culture is why. Why do you see what you see? Why are people behaving in the ways that you observe them behaving? So really, it's going deeper and asking more questions about what you see on the surface. So for example, in this particular picture, what you might actually be seeing is could be on one end because people are really excited to be there, they're really involved. It's a very fast changing environment. So that might be one kind of set of whys you're seeing what you see. But on the other end of the continuum might be another set of whys. They're disorganized, they're not integrated, they're putting out fires, they're being very reactive. So culture is really hard to get to because it's not what you see on the surface. You have to ask more questions, go deeper, and ask why. So, a shared definition of culture is here on this slide. So, it really thought of as the collective values, norms, and beliefs of the organization. So, it's how things are done around here, not what it feels like. It's how things are done around here. So the values part is what's really important here. Really not what we maybe say is important, but what really is important. What are the ways we go about doing things? What are the shared assumptions that are deep and that are underlying? So culture, many people think about culture as being the backdrop. It's always there. It's always influencing everything that happens in the organization. And there's also some research to say that it's probably or could be the single most important factor in organizational success or failure. So culture is pretty important to any organization. One of the analogies that I like to use is culture is to organizations as personalities are to people. So it's really a way to describe something that's pretty complex, like a person. A personality isn't just one attribute, it's not just one thing. It's really a series of elements that describe something that's pretty complex. So just wanted to share with you some examples of cultural attributes. So this, please think of this not as an exhaustive list. These are just some of my favorite cultural attributes, things that I see in lots of organizations and things that we might really pay attention to, but definitely not exhaustive. So some examples of cultural attributes. Top-down decision making versus participative decision making. So think about in your organization how some of these might play out. So are there people from the very top who are always the ones making all decisions, even the small ones, or do decisions also get made from the bottom? Is your organization cold versus caring? Where might you fall on that continuum? Is it disjointed or is it really integrated? Are people micromanaged or is there a lot of autonomy? Are you reactive or proactive? Is there honesty or secrecy? Are people tending to be curious or really not caring, kind of indifferent? So think about these again just as examples. And the way they're positioned on this slide looks like there's sort of bad versus good, but it's not that way at all. There's a continuum at which you might fall against these two sides. And also, it's combinations of these attributes really that make up your culture. It's not just one. There might be some that are primary that rise to the top, but it really is a combination of cultural attributes. One thing also to note here is that what you don't see on this page is anything related to margaritas or ping pong tables or events, and that's by design. One of the things that I think is a bit of a misnomer about culture is that culture equals events. In fact, I even saw a job description for a culture ambassador. And I was, of course, really excited to read the job description. When I looked into it, it actually was for an event planner. So I see a lot of organizations making the mistake of trying to solve culture on a surface level, doing things like putting in ping pong tables or saying we're going to have, drinks on Friday, thinking that they're checking the box in terms of how they're addressing culture. And so I really encourage companies to think about that and be a little more thoughtful about what culture really is. You could think about the idea of fun, being one of the cultural attributes that could be on this list. So we could have added fun versus boring or boring versus fun as one of the cultural attributes. And sure, we might decide that as an organization, we really care about that. But it's just one of many cultural attributes that you might care about. What are we doing in a formal way or in a really intentional way around all these other things about our culture, other things that we might really want to be intentional about? So fun is really just one of many cultural attributes. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some characteristics of culture. So culture is very much abstract for most companies. Most companies don't have a language or a way to talk about culture. So if you just think about those attributes that were on the prior slide, most companies probably couldn't do very much in terms of describing their real culture, what's really happening with a language, with terms. So it's abstract for most companies. Some companies have figured it out, but for most it's abstract. It's also very subtle and unconscious. It affects us all the time, and we don't even realize it. And then it's powerful because it tells you how to behave. It really shapes your behavior. Let me give you an example of this. One of my favorite examples was one that I experienced. It happened to me. I was working in a large technology company, and it was a kind of place where everybody had their own offices. In fact, not only did everybody have their own offices, but everybody had their own closed door offices that they sat in. I had just started in this company. I was about a week in, and I was asked to write a memo. And that was in the olden days when you actually had, in all caps, memorandum at the top of the page that you printed out. And I was asked to write a memo, and I thought after I wrote it, boy, it sure would be nice to know if this is any good, if this would work here, if this is something that really fits here. So I thought, gosh, it would be great if somebody read it for me. And I thought about, there's one of my teammates is sitting right next door to me. Let me go and ask her to read this memo. So I opened my door, went across, and I knocked on her door. And she was typing away as hard as she could, and she kept typing but said, "Come in." I walked in, and I asked her very calmly, but asked her if she would read my memo. And she said, "Oh, okay." A little bit of a look on her face, like, why would I do that? But she said, "Okay," still typing the whole time. So I tiptoed back out, closed the door, went back into my office, sat there and thought, oh no, when do I go back? When do I ask her? So I thought, I'm going to give her plenty of time, went back the next day. And as I go back the next day, knock on her door, and the memo is sitting in the exact same place as it was. And she's still typing. And she said to me, "Oh, it's fine. It's okay." And I could tell she hadn't really read it. There weren't any notes on it. There was no feedback from her. And what that told me very early on in my experience there was, we don't do that here. We don't ask for feedback. We don't ask for help. About a week later, I was told by my manager, again, I'm just new to this company, that you need to stop helping people. You need to really toot your own horn more. So I got a lot of messages really early in my experience at this particular company that it's kind of, I'm in it for myself, and that we don't collaborate and work together here in this company. So that's what's amazing about culture, is you get messages, especially when you're new to a group or new to an organization, you get messages early on about how things get done. So it starts to shape my behavior, and it starts telling me what direction I'm supposed to go, how things are done here. So if I hadn't actually adapted, and if I hadn't actually kind of conformed to those behaviors, more than likely I wouldn't be working there. I would be fired, or I would be getting the message that I should look somewhere else. So as people, human beings are smart. They learn to adapt. They learn to work within the system in which they are in. So then if you fast forward 3 years from then, I'm still working in the same company, and I was actually on a conference call with about a bunch of outside people from my graduate program. And we were on this call working together to do a big presentation for a conference. And I realized that I was getting really impatient with these people sharing all this fun information about their families and what they've been doing. I was telling people, come on, move this along. Let's get this going. I need to get my stuff done. And I took a step back and I realized, oh my gosh, I've become one of them. I completely am part of this culture now. So you become such a part of it that you don't even realize that you are. So it just becomes the way you do things. You don't even question it. You don't even see it anymore. So that's why culture matters so much. It's extremely powerful. It shapes the behavior of your employees. And so thinking about your own organizations, think about what kinds of messages your employees are getting early on, especially because that's a pretty critical time, early on about really what is important in your company, what really matters. So that's important that they get hopefully the right messages about what matters. All right. So culture is very powerful. It's also dynamic. It surrounds us. It impacts everything. So any kind of program or project or initiative that you're putting in place absolutely will be impacted by your culture. So if it's aligned with the culture, more than likely it'll work. If it's not aligned with your culture, it won't. And in my experiences, I've seen so many just really um, big attempts at trying to put forth and make change in a company, but when it's not aligned with the culture, just seeing it fail is so sad. So I was working with a company who got a lot of really good feedback around work-life balance needing to be improved from their employee surveys and other data gathering sources. They knew that they needed to work on work-life balance. And they put this great program together. They did a ton of work to try to make sure that the program could be rolled out. They put a website together. They even trained their managers on how to support work-life balance. Well, after 6 months, they only had 3 people in the whole company sign up for the program, and they realized it was because the culture was completely misaligned. They had a CEO who would walk the hallways at 5:30 to see where everybody was. So that was just one of many messages that employees were getting that said, we don't really value your work-life balance. It's really not okay for you to take advantage of this program. Our culture is sending a message that's different from the program that you're trying to institute. So finally on this slide, there is an interesting way of thinking about culture that it's not necessarily a good or bad culture. It's more relative goodness or relative not goodness. There's not an absolute, meaning that for your company, is your culture good? Do the specific aspects of your culture help your company move forward, help you achieve your strategy, or do they hold you back? Do they hinder you? So there's a relative goodness, not an absolute goodness. It really is the culture that you need to have in order for your business to succeed. All right. So culture tells us what to pay attention to, what things mean, how to react emotionally, how to behave. It really tells us how to make sense of the world. And there's some different views of culture that are important, really thinking about the current culture of the organization versus the future culture, and having an understanding of where your culture is now and where you want it to be is pretty important. But one of the shortcuts that you can think about with regard to culture, if you don't have the ability to do a culture assessment, is to use your values. If you have company values, you can think of those company values as a proxy for culture. So really, they're not the same. So values and culture are not exactly the same. I would typically think of culture as more comprehensive, probably a bigger list than the 5 to 7 value statements that your company might have. Also, values tend to be more aspirational. So you need to be aware of that many times the values of a company are things that we would love to be, we hope to be, but we actually aren't now. And I've done a lot of work with different companies on their values. And what's important to note is that usually there's, of the 5-ish that they have, there's probably 3 that are very much being lived out currently, but there are a couple that are more aspirational and aren't in place. So really understand that values are a proxy for where you want to be in the future and not necessarily where you are today. All right. So understanding your culture really helps you in lots of different ways, and here's just a couple of them. So first is the socialization of new employees, and I talked about that a bit already. But the idea here is if you could be really clear about the culture that you have, you could help employees ease in to your company. You can also maybe shape that experience for them a little bit more and help them get off on the right foot. It's also a way for you to describe your company to potential partners, to potential customers, and it's a way for you to make sure the organization is aligned, align the employees and leaders and really any work streams in the organization um, to the culture and that you really want to have. And finally, the engagement part is pretty important because depending on what your company does, some companies don't necessarily have some product that they're creating, or they might not be a nonprofit. So the actual work might not be something that's very inspirational, but the culture that you create really can be the thing that connects employees to the organization. It helps them feel emotionally connected to the organization in terms of how we want to be. What kind of company do we want to stand for? What is it that we really want to be about? So it's a way for you to engage employees in something that feels pretty meaningful by the way that you articulate the culture. So another reason why you might care, so not only is it a great tool for making sure people are aligned and a great way for you to communicate to people in the organization and outside the organization, you also could really care because there's some great research to show that organizations who have cultures that are performance enhancing. And when we say performance enhancing, what we mean are cultures that are really aligned with the business objectives of the company. So they're really supportive of what the company's trying to do. So companies that have this performance enhancing culture have much better outcomes than those who don't. So this particular study was done by Cotter and Haskett, and they showed 12 firms that had these performance enhancing cultures and 20 that didn't. And revenue growth, employment growth, stock price growth, net income growth were much higher for those organizations with performance enhancing cultures. So there's some good empirical evidence that there are business reasons why we would want to make sure that we have these cultures that are really aligned. So aligning a culture and a business strategy is another important thing for you to understand. So it's not necessarily creating a culture that would be fun for people or necessarily one that would be, oh, that would be so fun to work there. It's actually the culture that you need to have in order for you to achieve your strategy. And sometimes it can be really blatant disconnects between what a company is trying to do and what the culture actually is like. Another example was a company I was doing a lot of work with that had a very bureaucratic, hierarchical culture. In fact, you could just feel it when you walked in the door that people were nervous and scared to work there. They very much saw their jobs in a box and never would stray from that. They'd say things like, that's not on my job description. I don't do those kinds of things, when you'd ask them a question that was a little bit big. And they had a radical shift in their business strategy. They were trying to become a disruptor in their market, and they were in the insurance industry, and trying to come up with brand new approaches to technology, new innovations. And so on the very surface, this change in their strategy of being more innovative, there was really no way that was going to be supported by what the day-to-day norms, values, and beliefs of the company were, which were much more traditional and bureaucratic. So they had to do a lot of work to try to help people feel more comfortable to be open and honest and try new things. So sometimes I see really blatant disconnects between what a company is trying to achieve and what the actual experience of working in a particular company is like. So it really needs to be some alignment. So some signs, if you don't already think that there's some work you could do around culture, there might be some other signs for you around culture and maybe, that might indicate that you have a culture problem. So one of the things that I see happens is, especially on something like an employee engagement survey, where the same issues come up year after year after year. For example, cross-group collaboration is one that I see in lots of companies, that we feel like we do something on the surface. We have a program that is addressing that, or we have some things that we're doing that feel fairly tactical probably in nature, but we check that box on our action plan, but still it doesn't change. It still continues to be low. I would say that's probably related to culture. And so you have to solve that in a much deeper, more meaningful way from the top of the organization. And we'll talk about that in a minute. If you think of employees are really leaving your company at rates that you have never had in the past, or you're getting a lot of signs that they're going to be leaving, that also might be an indicator that there's something going on from a culture perspective. Lack of alignment between leaders and employees. This is a really important one when it comes to culture, because many times leaders think they understand the culture, and even might think everything's great with the culture because they have a pretty positive experience with the culture. It's important to know that leaders really should never be the voice of what the current culture actually is. It should always come from employees in terms of how they experience it, their words. Leaders are oftentimes protected from the culture, or they just are treated differently in the system than employees are. So never let your leaders of an organization be the ones who tell people how they think the culture is, because it's just different from what the frontline employees might be experiencing. So if there's a real lack of alignment between leaders and employees, if you feel like leaders just don't get it, or employees just don't get it, there might be something related to culture there. Anytime there's an acquisition, a merger, a joint venture, more than likely there's something that you need to do related to culture. There's some work that needs to be done to really understand the organizations that are coming together. It's hard enough for any one organization to understand their own culture, but when you put multiple organizations together, it just gets multiplied. The complexity gets multiplied. So if you're going through an acquisition, merger, joint venture, then more than likely you should be paying attention to culture. And then finally, kind of to my point before, if you're changing your business strategy, so that's a huge sign to me. If there's something pretty radical that you're trying to do from a business perspective, more than likely you should be thinking about culture. So the norms and values and beliefs that have gotten you to the place that you are now, that have gotten you maybe the accolades or the success that you've gotten, are probably not going to work if you're changing your strategy. So you really have to be thoughtful about, what do we need to modify or change about the day-to-day kind of way we go about doing things here in order for us to be aligned with this change in our strategy. So we really encourage organizations to be intentional. And for some people and some companies, this is a little bit of a shift in mindset, that you actually can architect your culture. So when we say that, what we mean is, let's not just kind of be done to with our culture. Let's get in front of it. Let's really be thoughtful about the culture that we want to have. So the key here is really to be intentional, to be proactive with it. We are clear, any group of people of more than 3 that get together and any regular amount of time, there's a group there and you have a culture. So is it the one you really need to have? Is your culture the one that's going to set you up for success in your organization? So we really encourage organizations to take more of this architectural model of to culture. So how does the architectural model of culture work? So the probably most important part of this, the most critical piece, is leadership. And the CEO of your organization actually is the one who has to be the architect. So it's wonderful to have an HR organization who's driving a lot of the culture work. And really, probably HR is one of the better positioned groups to be able to actually make culture come to life. So I think that's wonderful. But the CEO has to be the face to it and has to be the person who's helping to design and communicate and reinforce the culture. One of the things that I think is pretty interesting is the role of founder in this. So, in smaller organizations or new organizations, the culture of the organization can look just like the founder's personality. The things that the founder cares about or the ways that the founder acts show up in the culture. And it's a pretty fascinating thing. But even after the founder's been gone, some of those fundamental aspects still carry through in your culture. So it very much is related to the leadership and what leaders value. That comes across in the culture. So some things to know about ways leaders impact culture. So for sure, if they are playing the architect role, if they're standing in front of it, they're the voice of culture, that's wonderful. And again, encourage that and very much believe that's necessary for this to succeed. But another thing to know is that the individual behavior of the leader can send a huge message to employees about whether or not this stuff is real. So if on one hand at the company meetings or town halls, the leader's saying, yay, culture, and this is what our culture needs to be, and this is really important, but then when they go back to the next meeting after the town hall or after the company meeting and they do something that's opposite of the culture or not supportive of the culture, that actually gets magnified. That becomes even more important than the message the employees might have heard at the company meeting. So very much their own individual behavior matters a lot. Also, the behavior that is quote unquote allowed in the leadership team. So if there are some special people who get to act in special ways that go against the culture that you're trying to put forth, that also is a message to employees that we're really not serious about this, that there's exceptions. And if they see exceptions, if they see that people can get away with not actually living the culture that you want them to live, then they're not going to do the hard work it takes to be part of that culture. They're going to see that they can get away with it too. So really important how the leader and the leadership team shows up as stewards of the culture. They should be ahead of it. They should be, with hands down, the ones that you would trust to be representing the culture. So there's also, who the CEO hires, who they fire, different what they pay attention to in terms of projects or priorities, the way systems get instituted, and just the way communication happens. All of that sends a message to employees about whether or not this culture thing really matters. I had an example of this, and again, at another company that I was working at, the CEO hired me to help with culture, and we did this really important work around a culture assessment and really trying to change culture in a few key areas. And he was all on board when it came to the actual communication at the company meeting and the emails that he would send. But it was his own behavior behind the scenes, the way that he would actually have these sidebar conversations, that he would swoop in and undo decisions. He would talk about people behind their back. He really created this triangulation feeling. Really went against everything we were trying to do with the culture. So the CEO's behavior is so important whenever you're trying to work on culture change. All right, so just a little bit about Limeade and what we do here with regard to culture. I told you at the beginning that there are two big ways we care about culture. We care about internally really focusing on culture, and obviously we also care about how we work with our customers and how the culture is supporting the work we're doing with them. But at Limeade, what we really know is that from the get-go of this company, we have articulated a set of values that we believe are important, and we want to make sure that those sets of values come to life. So we have what we call an intentional culture circle. And this intentional culture circle is really sort of a method, or even you could think about it as a reminder of the things that an organization might do in order to always have culture in the forefront, to always be focusing on culture. So the very first part is around having a shared vision of what the culture is. So it not only is the values and the values statements, but it's does this why do these values matter to us here at this company? So articulation of what it is and why it matters. The second part is around, okay, that's wonderful. We've got a shared vision of this, and it makes sense. How do we behavioralize that? How do we move it past a tagline to something that employees actually understand? What does that mean for me in my day-to-day behavior? What do you expect of me when I sit down in front of my computer? What am I supposed to be doing related to each one of these values? So having clear behavioral expectations. And then how do we help people learn about this stuff? How do we talk about it? How do we make sure people understand that this really is something that we want them to do? How do we let them spend some time on it? And then accountability and metrics kind of at some different levels, at the individual level, at the team level, at the company level, building in a way for us to know if we're doing this right and a way for us to get feedback and actually make progress, make improvement. Another interesting piece of intentional culture is having champions that aren't just the top leaders. I said before that matters a lot to have the CEO as the driver or the architect of culture, and for sure the leaders on the leadership team being a really important piece of this. But having informal leaders throughout the organization be champions is also can be very powerful and a way to reinforce and make the culture come to life. Communication is obviously an important piece of this because it has to feel real. It can't just be once a year or when the leadership team goes for an offsite and they come back because they talked about culture and we have one presentation on it and never talk about it again. That's a problem. So there has to be a regular rhythm to the communication. Visible demonstrations and opportunities. This is how do I participate in this culture? So at Limeade, we have this thing called Own It Day, where people have a chance to actually talk about ideas they have for making changes to our product. And we have all kinds of ways we get together to talk about that. So visible demonstrations and opportunities to experience the culture are pretty important. But what's interesting I see happen in most companies is we go right from the blue of the shared vision and we skip all those steps in between and go right to visible demonstrations and opportunities. So we have events, sort of back to that party planner problem, and then none of the other steps in between. So there's not a lot of ways to create real meaning in the day-to-day work around culture. The next two are related to each other. So policies, procedures, and system alignment. That could be its own, whole presentation. There's so much work to be done there. But if you actually have done all these other steps around, behavioralizing the culture and putting into place, regular education and communication, you can start weaving culture into your whole people system. You can think about, how do we hire for culture fit? How do we actually talk about this in new employee orientation? How do we put this into performance management? How do we think about promoting people relative to this? How do we think about developing people? So the whole people system can be reflective of the culture that you're trying to create, and it will have much more power. And the rewards and recognition piece is just a special case of that, one that just we call out because we feel like it's pretty important to make sure those people who are doing an amazing job demonstrating your culture get some sort of reward for that or recognition. And the same for the opposite. If people aren't actually demonstrating the culture, what happens to them? Is there some sort of way that they at least don't get rewarded in the system? So you could see this as a circle that's never ending. And the reason why it's never ending is that there's always more work to do. There's always something that changes in the external environment, or something happens with your strategy and that makes you need to keep revisiting this. But we hope you use something like this or this particular circle just as a reminder of the different approaches, the different levers you can pull to be more intentional about culture. So our challenge to you, do one thing to be intentional about your culture. There's a list of a couple ideas here. So you can make sure, if you don't already have values, articulate what you want your company to stand for. You could do a little culture audit. You could do a very elaborate culture assessment, or you could just take your values and ask some employees, which ones of these are we demonstrating and which of these are we not? Talk with the leadership team about whether or not you're actually being intentional, or whether or not you're actually architecting your culture, or you're just letting it happen to you. Determine ways you can put the culture more specifically into your people system. You can develop a process for measuring culture progress. There's some pretty easy ways to do that. You can think about adding a culture index into your employee engagement survey. That's a way that I've seen a lot of companies starting to really measure that in an ongoing way. And if you're one of our amazing customers, you can think about how does Limeade help you from the challenges, rewards, videos, branding, to really reinforce your culture. So what I hope you got from this webinar is, what is culture? Why should you care about it? And some ideas for how you can be more intentional. So thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Laura. Now we're going to kick off the Q&A, and we've got a few great questions already submitted, but feel free to submit them over the next few minutes. Laura, let's start. So we have two questions from Ronald and Jennifer that are very similar. And their question is, how can one employee help positively shape the culture, especially if the culture is negative and it's stemming from leadership? And then Ronald sort of has a similar add-on to that of, can it actually be changed from the bottom up, or does it have to come from the top? I think there's some employees wanting to influence change here.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate that you asked that. And I get sometimes that can feel like a frustrating place to be. I would say that there are ways for an employee to create an awareness, and it depends on the size of the company, but at least on your team or in your department, around this idea of culture, and really maybe questioning some of the things that we just take for granted. You might have remembered in the beginning when I was talking about the idea of being native to your culture. You so become part of it that you lose a sense of awareness around even doing some of these things. And sometimes if you have a new employee who joins your group, they point it out. And that might be a really interesting way to go about this, is if you have new employees tell the rest of the group what their experience was and what they were surprised about and what's different from other places that they worked. But that said, as one employee, what can you do? So I would say first, try to create a sense of awareness in your team or department about what culture is, and that maybe there are a couple things that we should question. Maybe there are a couple things that actually don't help us. They get in our way of being successful. And maybe just tackling one of those. So let me take one that's one that I see happen in a lot of organizations, where we sort of break down into silos, where we have these groups that work against each other and they don't work with each other. So one of the things you can do is say, gosh, from a cultural perspective, I think this is something that's holding us back. And because of our strategy or our shared goals or something that we're trying to do together, we could see that this is getting in our way. So let's just take that one cultural aspect and let's try to break it down, and at least for our department, figure out 2 or 3 things that we can do to make this better. So it could be something as simple as, let's go to each other's staff meetings, or have a representative who goes to each other's staff meetings so we can learn about what the other group is doing, and also share back and forth what's happening and what are some of the ways that we could be working together better. Even if we had the manager of the department set an expectation, hey, we know this matters. We're worried that we've got a norm of being siloed. Let's figure out new ways for us to come together. And I have this expectation that we'll work together as a team. So it's a little bit of taking one bite off at a time. And another thing is, how could you actually influence? And I know in some organizations that are really big, this would be very hard to do. But if you're in a smaller organization, it might be possible to get time with the leadership team or get time with the CEO and talk to them. I see so many leaders realizing how important it is to listen. And I think if you could communicate to your leadership team what you're experiencing and why it matters, it can make a big difference. I've seen a couple listening sessions that I've seen CEOs do that changed their complete direction of where they were headed because of employee feedback. So don't underestimate your ability to actually have an impact like that, and try. Again, I know that it depends a little bit about what kind of company you're in.
Thanks, Laura. And we have another great question from Noel. He said that we offered the analogy of what personality is to an individual, a culture is to an organization. So is it as difficult to modify this organizational culture as it is to change the personality of an individual? And is that even to a meaningful degree?
Yeah, I love that. And that's great. And that analogy extends to what you just offered. It is very hard to change a culture. And it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of intentionality, and it takes so much of the leadership team focus to be able to actually do it for real. And yeah, I agree with you that personalities are hard to change, but you might think about it from the perspective of, if you've gotten feedback about a particular aspect of your personality that was pretty important for you to work on, if you have an awareness about it, you can actually take some steps to help you in the right direction. You can start thinking about how you might want to modify those aspects of your personality. If you want to work within, if you want to work within a particular job where you got that feedback, a lot of it depends on your own personal motivation. But I want to throw out another idea that's related to that analogy, and it's the idea of your personality really needs to align with the career choice that you make. It's the same thing when you think about the culture of an organization has to align with the business strategy that they're trying to achieve. There just has to be a fit there. So there's a lot of ways I think that this personality analogy works, and it very much also, to support your point, it's hard. It's not easy. It's hard to change a personality, but if you have a particular circumstance where you feel like you need to make some modifications, it is possible.
And this is a good question on measurement. From Alberto. For smaller companies, what are some ways to measure the ROI of these culture initiatives, and what's the time frame for evaluating that ROI?
Yeah, that's good. So you could start a little smaller when it comes to ROI. And one of the ways that I think any size really company should be doing this is talking to your employees and getting your employees' perspective on whether or not they are, one of them just simply could be, overall, are they satisfied with the culture? Is the culture one that they really enjoy being part of? So that's one way you could do it, is just by asking employees in your employee survey or in some sort of more pulse survey type of approach, asking the employee perspective, because that matters a lot. You could also ask your customers. So you could ask your customers how they experience your company's culture. And this is also something that you can do, in a customer satisfaction survey, but you could also just ask them. And start learning from your customers whether or not the culture that they experience by talking with your employees feels like one that's constructive or positive or helpful, whatever it is that you're trying to do for your customers. So my first response is, and for smaller companies, is just talk to people, ask them. And, you might not be able to have this great hard metric, but then you'll know. And you also can make course corrections a lot quicker once you do that.
And another follow-up question here, how could Limeade work together with other consultants, especially employee benefit advisors, around that culture wellness connection?
Okay, there's a lot of different ways I can think of. Well, first of all, I thought this was pretty interesting. Just the idea of, is culture a benefit? And I really think it is. I think it's an underutilized, misunderstood benefit, and that most companies aren't really being intentional about culture as a benefit, and not realizing that, boy, if I spent some effort in this space, it will actually help me attract new employees, keep employees. It can have much more of an impact than maybe my 401k plan. So I think that that's one place to go, is just to think about that, as think about culture as a benefit. Another way to go is to think about the alignment of your culture with wellness. And I would never probably say you should lead with something like culture of health or culture of wellness, unless that's what your business strategy is. So if you're a hospital, if you're some sort of care nonprofit of some sort, then maybe. But I think you could think about which of your cultural attributes, remember that big list in the beginning, which of those cultural attributes are really aligned with what we're trying to help our employees do when it comes to wellness. So there's some specific cultural attributes that you might really want to care about. One of them is whether or not you tend to be short-term versus long-term. So if you have a short-term approach to everything, it's going to be really hard for your employees to be focused on their own wellness, because they're only going to be cranking out deliverables all day long. So that's an example of one cultural attribute that should really be aligned if you wanted to focus on wellness. Another one might be about, do we fundamentally value people's growth? Do we believe people can grow and improve? If we don't believe that, more than likely employees aren't going to be supported in their wellness efforts. So there's a lot to think about in terms of just positioning culture as a benefit, and also how we think about specific attributes of a culture and how supportive they are of what you're trying to do from a wellness perspective.
Thank you. And another question from Elizabeth. This one's about, are shared culture and good fit the same thing? I think you hear the word good fit with a company a lot.
Yeah. So it's interesting, right? Because I think that they are similar. There's the idea of, what do we share in terms of the norms, values, and beliefs, and do we all have that kind of same understanding? That's where usually I go from a shared understanding of the culture. You can be a good fit or not a good fit, maybe, with that shared culture. And again, the problem with all of this is that we have very few companies have any language to talk about this at all. So it's more of a feeling of fit. And also another kind of layer on top of that is then that alignment piece, right? And so a person could fit with the culture, but the culture actually might not fit or align with the strategy. So there's some different layers of this, some different ways for us to understand how culture could fit. So a person could fit with the culture, but the culture might not be the culture you need that's really aligned with the strategy. So there's different ways to think about that.
All right. And one more question before we wrap up. How do the inherent attributes of different industries affect a culture's ability to be architected?
I love that question. That's awesome. There really are some different levels of culture to think about. And so this talk that we're talking about is the idea of organizational culture. But you could also think about the culture of a particular profession or the culture of a particular industry. So let me give you an example. I was just doing a talk similar to this with a big consortium of accounting firms. So the accounting firm, just being an accountant, there's a set of things that you value that really infiltrate all of those cultures of those organizations. So they all talked about, oh, absolutely, there's a precision to what we do, and there has to be metrics, and there has to be order, and there are a whole series of attributes that they use to describe all of their cultures. So, this is probably 20 different companies, but they all had something that they shared because of the profession. And so I think that you could also extend that to an industry, a particular kind of industry, or particular kind of focus area. There tends to be things that we think are important, and that would play out in the culture. So I think that's a really fascinating thing to think about. And then another layer on top of that is, Also the geographical culture or the national culture. So the physical location that your company is in, and what's valued in that particular community or what's valued in that country can impact your culture. So there's some different layers for sure to think about in terms of professions and industries and nations and geographies that can impact your culture, and really good to think about.
Thanks, everyone. Those were really good questions. We're going to wrap up, but we'll be sending a follow-up email to everyone that registered for this webinar with a link to the slides as well as a recording. And this webinar was really inspired by an ebook that we put together earlier this month. And if you'd like to download a copy, you can access that at sip.limeade.com/culture-architect. And we'll send you a link as well. But hope you enjoyed today's presentation. Thank you.